Are they intentionally sexualizing our children and stealing their innocence?
I think that's right.
TikTok specifically is designed to target young people. That's who their audience is.
Have children died because of social media?
Absolutely.
Have they been trafficked off of social media?
100%.
Have they been sexually exploited off of social media?
Ongoing. Yes.
I'm scrolling on TikTok. I see little kids with TikTok. What are they looking at?
This is what you don't want kids to see, is that correct?
Exactly.
And again, this is depicting children. This is supposed to be kids.
Well, honestly, I didn't even know that transition from female to male was an option until I was on social media.
And that was a clip from this, I would say, blockbuster documentary, a must-see. If you're a parent, a grandparent, an aunt or uncle, The War on Children. And I am honored to have the creators of this important documentary, Robbie and Landon Starbuck. Thank you for joining me on CPAC Now, America UnCanceled.
Thank you
for having us.
So I got to tell you something. I know there's been, different folks trying to push or basically produce these type of documentaries. This one was just so hard-hitting, so shocking, so revealing of what is happening in terms of the left and their obsession with taking over our children and literally transforming them from a gender standpoint. Walk us through what made you decide we got to work on this documentary. This is a priority for us.
Yeah, to be totally fair, the people out there who've made these docs or tried to, to cover different areas of this, they've gone into like micro areas. So they say, okay, we're going to cover this one thing. We said we need to cover the broad spectrum of this war on kids because there's no one place you can go and send people. We had this conversation with Kelly Paul, Rand Paul's wife,
right,
where she's like, I know these people in D.C. who do not believe there's porn in schools. They do not believe that these drag shows have happened. They don't believe any kids have gotten surgery. And I have no one place to point them and say, hey, look at this. And I was like, well, that's what this documentary is going to be, is that one place you can go. And the entire war is exposed from how corporate America plays into it, big pharma, to the schools and the government and the NGOs, these nonprofits that are really fronts for left-wing activists. We're going to put it all together. And the other thing that's I guess not quite fair in terms of filmmaking is I'm probably the only person in the conservative movement who's vocally Republican in America First and has actually directed Oscar-winning actors, actresses, and some of the biggest stars in the world. So, I left that world and I, for quite a while, sort of just said, you know what, I'm going to focus on trying to change our country in the ways that we want to see it change and to really embrace the America First ideology. But I recognized, like, hey, you know what? It's time to go back to what you're good at and make films and show people what's really going on and use that art of storytelling, in a way that is commiserate with the level of quality people are used to from Hollywood.
Right. Robbie, I know you're much cooler than the rest of all of other conservatives, like my sweet husband. But really, who's cooler than you is your wife, Landon, who is obviously, I think, just a superstar. And in part of this documentary, Landon, let me ask you, you're talking to survivors of child mutilation. You're talking to corporate executives. You even talked to a drag performer that wants to quickly get out of the interview. I want to play this clip real quick.
Have you seen any sexually explicit drag shows marketed as all ages for kids that you would denounce or think that are a problem and that you want to distance yourself from?
No.
You know this is wrong.
So, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to end the interview.
So Landon, obviously the individual did not feel comfortable responding to these questions. Talk to us about what happened at that moment and why there was this quote unquote discomfort after you all confronted this individual.
Well, yeah, I mean, it started out as a very just real, raw conversation to hear his perspective on drag. And I went into this interview pretty much thinking he was going to denounce the sexually explicit shows that are taking place across our country and say, hey, yeah, I do drag, but I wouldn't do this. And so when we pulled out these photographs and wanted to show even more, but he didn't want to see it, evidence, and just simply ask, can you denounce this sexually explicit behavior in front of children? Can you just do that? He couldn't do it. And that's really the turning point where the interview went, sour, and he wanted out immediately, even though he ironically stayed to talk longer with us. So it was very indicative that this ideology doesn't permit you to veer outside of the lane of that homogenous groupthink. You have to be okay with sexualizing kids, with exposing them to this sexually explicit content. You cannot have your own opinion or say, hey, I just don't do that.
Yeah. Robbie, let me ask you, what was one of the hardest moments when you were producing and directing this documentary, in terms of an interview that you said, goodness, if someone watches this part of this documentary, I think it's an important message that needs to be sent, that for people to understand what's really going on in terms of the war on our children.
Yeah, before I get to that, I would say Landon can attest I'm incredibly boring, not cool. But when it comes to the most powerful thing, you know, I have to give credit to Landon, because when we got to the part of the doc where we were at the end of filming, you know, we've spent all of our travel budget and everything. She found the story of Yaley and Yaley's mom. Yaley, of course, is the girl who sadly, tragically committed suicide after being transitioned in the state care of California. And her mom is the mom we interviewed, and it was the most heartbreaking interview, one of the most difficult conversations I've had on camera, off camera in my whole life, because when you're a parent, you can feel that person's anguish. There's nothing a parent is more afraid of than losing their child. Nothing comes close to that sort of like really deep down fear. You don't even want to touch it or think about it because it's so unbearably awful.
Right.
And so to sit there and be with it, you know, I was like, we're at the end of this, Landon. I don't know if we can, you know, squeeze somebody else in. And Landon's like, we're just going to do it. We're just going to do it. And she, you know, made sure everything was booked and said, we're doing it, and ended up being the most powerful part in my eyes of the doc, because I think that's the moment where people end up in tears. Is it really hits you. This is not just a war that has some faceless, you know, effect on society. This is real. This is people's kids, and they're losing them, whether it's death or whether it's losing them after going to college and adopting a crazy ideology.
You know, I got to ask, like, I think, you know, it's hard enough for these children, and you all have, you know, at least one teenage child going through puberty, and then adding to that the pressure of this over-sexualization in our society, and this push by groups and individuals to say, if you're going through puberty and you're having depression and anxiety, well, you know, cut your breast off, get a mastectomy, or, you know, or change your sex. What do you think drives the left to push this ideology, Landon?
I think it's a desire to undermine the nuclear family. You have to separate parents from their children. I mean, that is the ideological premise of everything we see happening, even policy-wise, with all these states adopting policies where children are medically kidnapped by the state, and literally separating families every day in America now. And, you know, the more sinister aspect of this is, you know, gender ideology, queer theory, radical sexuality from Alfred Kinsey. I mean, these people fundamentally believe that children are sexual from birth, that childhood innocence is just a construct of cis heteronormativity. These are the ideas that underpin you know, their radical behaviors. And so when you understand that it really comes from the top, from academia, from the World Health Organization, from the International Planned Parenthood Federation, all of these, you know, global entities coming together to create these policies that then come into America through our radical sex ed, through our media, and all of these things, and become normalized. I mean, that's how we got here.
Robbie, let me ask you, we've seen just such a quick shift going in this direction of, you know, you mentioned, Landon, the radicalized sex ed, and these international organizations very much involved in pushing this insanity. When do you think that shift really happened in America?
To be honest with you, it started a lot longer, you know, in history than people realize. So, I mean, this is something that if you go back decades ago, you know, the roots were planted in sort of queer theory and Alfred Kinsey's work and some crazy, you know, Mengele doctors that were out there trying to go down this path, like John Money. And so the truth is the seeds were there. And then you had the long march through the institution. So you had people that were radical leftists that essentially believe in some new form of Marxism. It's really, I call it a modern version of communism. And it was, one where you have to do everything subversively. In the past, communism was too honest about its aims, and that's a funny thing to say because they were massive liars even back then. But even by those standards, it was too honest. They need to do it even more under the radar now. So they understood that, and they were patient in a way that the conservative movement has not been. And we also have not had our guard up or been on offense to the degree necessary to stop these communists. And so I do see a sea change in that regard. And that's something that I hope that movies like this can sort of turn around.
Alfred Kinsey, who is he?
Dr. Alfred Kinsey is known as the father of modern sexuality. And he was connected to Playboy, the founder, and he was actually his protege. And till this day, there's a Dr. Alfred Kinsey Institute at the University of Indiana. And his theories were based on these horrific pedophilic research where kids were raped as young as, I think it was 2 months old, 3 months old, and that rape was documented. And so, I don't want to go further into the details now,
horrific.
But it's absolutely horrific for people who want to look at the research. You would think that by now his work would be discredited, but no, it's celebrated. And like I said, it underpins all of these academic theories. Gail Rubin, I mean, you could go on and on and on, but these professors that are, in charge of educating our kids are teaching these theories and they're substantiating pedophilia, essentially.
Yeah, I would note, as we're talking about Kinsey, Landon did a phone call with this doctor that works for Pornhub. Yes, Pornhub has a doctor that works there. And I think if you watch the doc, that's one of the most shocking interviews, is like the stuff that this doctor says is just cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. But they talked about Kinsey, and the doctor refused to denounce any part of this. And so, this is still underpinning, like Landon said, the entirety of this whole ideology when it comes to gender and sex and sexualizing kids. Kinsey is celebrated across all major academic institutions today. And this was a horrific man. And the connections between Hugh Hefner that we explore in the film are really incredible. Like, Hugh Hefner was a virgin when he met Alfred Kinsey. It was Kinsey's influence that veered Hugh Hefner into this sexuality and sexual territory. So if you notice this is one of the things people were like, oh, I didn't know that. In the film, you'll notice that the Playboy bunny always wears a bow, right? Well, that was modeled after Kinsey. Kinsey always wore a bow. It was his staple item. He wore a bow tie.
Yeah. And you mentioned Playboy. You also mentioned Penthouse. I think it was Seth Gruber, if I'm correct on that, where they are part of this lobbying effort on pushing pornography onto our children. Talk to us about that.
Well, it shouldn't be a surprise. I mean, but yes, it's we expose that in the film. Seth Gruber's fantastic on this issue. And there's honestly, I wish we could do a separate film on just that stuff, because there's so much there that Seth and Landon and I talked about. We probably have a 3-hour interview about that, just sitting on the hard drive. So we probably will edit that up and put that out separately, because it's incredible. The vast knowledge Seth has on that is really, really something to study. But I will say, as you look at these policies, Landon has also exposed stuff about the ALA now. The ALA today, which was deeply connected and embedded in this whole thing of defending all this, they're still going down this track of really trying to, excuse this type of sexualization of kids.
I got to ask, I know we've talked about conservatives. I would say just like everyday Americans, parents out there who weren't even political before and now are saying, I have to get involved in the process because they're really brainwashing my child. What can conservatives do more? That's my first question. Secondly, why are Democrats just so in bed, and that's kind of an interesting way to say it, but so in bed with, the left and their obsession with over-sexualizing the kids?
Well, I'll take the first part of the question. if we don't get involved as conservatives, as Christians, as Republicans, I mean, it's over from here. It's very clear. They've captured the institutions. And until we fight to get every aspect of them back and defend our families like our children's lives depend on it, because they do, if we don't prioritize that, it's over from here. It's over as a country, because you don't have a country if you don't have morals, if you don't have a strong nuclear family.
Yeah.
And so, one thing I would just add is beyond seeing this film and being outraged, something that parents can do right now is go to my nonprofit, which combats child exploitation. Our website, we have a free parenting revolution manual that outlines step by step how we fight back, what actions can be taken, and the best resources possible. Do you want to take the Democrats?
Yeah. So you asked.
Robbie loves taking on the Democrats. I love it.
Oh yeah, I had to get in that one.
So you asked, why are the Democrats, really seemingly embracing this idea of sexualizing kids? And it's really very simple. People like, Gavin Newsom, they don't actually believe that this is a good thing. They know it's not. Maybe you could make an exception for somebody like Joe Biden, who with his sniffing and groping and all that stuff, maybe he does think it's okay. But the vast majority of Democrats in public office, they don't actually believe this stuff. The truth is they understand a very core tenet of this modern form of communism and how you usher in communism. It has to happen through chaos. There has never been a happy country that suddenly decided to become communist. It has never happened. The only way to go and grab a new generation of people and fundamentally alter what has been normal for 100 years and tear away traditionalism and replace the parent with the state is to create chaos. And the number one way to do that is with topics that kids don't want to talk with their parents about. Well, what is that? Sex, sexual identity, gender. Most kids, they feel awkward. I would have felt awkward as a teenager talking with my parents about sex. So I get it. It's a topic you don't really want to discuss with your parents. But if you suddenly have this group of people at your school or online who are saying, hey, you can trust us, we're the safe people to talk to, your parents are trying to keep this from you. And like every teenager, you feel a little weird. I felt weird when I was a teenager. You kind of, inferred it earlier. I think everybody feels weird when they're going through puberty.
Right.
And now you're having this really evil group of people attach that weirdness to, hey, it could be fixed by joining our cult. Yes. And, so they're doing that to usher in the chaos necessary to grab this group of people, to turn them into the voters. They need to be able to usher us into this new form of communism in the future.
Well, and you all, obviously, TikTok has been, one of the worst that we can imagine when it comes to social media. Social media is involved in the sex trafficking scenario. We saw, for example, what Meta went through when Mark Zuckerberg was asked that question, where he literally had to apologize for these mental health outcomes that have happened with kids using social media and the sexual exploitation on there. When you all were doing your research and talking to folks, tell us about the TikTok and the danger of TikTok for our youth.
Well, social media, not just TikTok, but social media in general is, I think, the number one most dangerous factor threatening our children today, from everything from sextortion, sexual abuse, predators, and being exposed to pornography. And it is the number one thing that if we take that away from our kids, we are actually protecting them. And that's the number one thing we can do. I mentioned this in the manual. But what these social media companies have been able to do, in particular TikTok, is skirt any laws, because they don't have to abide by the same laws as any other business in America. They're protected by Section 230. Yeah. And so they continually hide behind that, and they're not being able to be held liable for that abuse. So talking to, especially in my work, I deal with families, survivors, victims all the time that have been, trafficked off of social media. At some point, porn and social media play a role in the victimization of sex trafficking victims and children who've been exploited.
Yeah, that's been something our CPAC Center for Combating Human Trafficking has been working with congressmen and state legislatures on that topic as well. Just big tech gets away with all of this, and they have there's no consequence. Robbie, I want to go to your tweet here, where you had at My Movies Plus that their TikTok account was suspended for 10 years after posting your trailer, the trailer of the documentary, The War on Children. What happened?
Well, some very powerful people don't want folks to see this movie. I mean, have you ever heard of a film that had over 30 million views on its trailer and there was basically a mainstream media blackout on it, and then the major social media companies banned it and banned its ads? I mean, Movies Plus is a major distributor, and they're banned for a decade now from TikTok because they had the gall to post our trailer after it had already received over 30 million views online. And so the only safe places seem to be X, Rumble, and Movies Plus. They were the only people brave enough to go and host and distribute the movies. So, I think that says a lot about the attack on free speech out there and how conservatives are discriminated against. But I think it also, it says a lot about the very powerful people who don't want folks to see this movie. And TikTok knows how dangerous this film is to them, because legislators are going to see it and they're going to understand that action needs to be taken to protect kids, especially on that platform, they are far worse than anybody else.
Absolutely. I think we should put out a call for legislators and the congressmen and senators to watch this movie, basically say, come on, let's challenge. I'm going to challenge you to watch this documentary. And I think you would get a lot of good response coming out of that. Robbie and Landon Starbuck, let me ask you, how can people watch this documentary? Where do they go?
Go to thewaronchildren.com. It's the easiest place. Go there, thewaronchildren.com, and you'll see all the different ways to watch, from your TV screen to your tablet or your phone, whatever's easy for you, and become a part of this movement. And don't forget, after you watch, it's not just infotainment to make people outraged. Go to freedomforever.us, put your email in. They will email you that free manual, which is the Parenting Revolution Manual, and it'll give you sort of, everything you need to know to get in this battle and to act to save this next generation.
Yeah, well, thank you for being so brave and being on the front lines. It comes with a big price, but you all, God's put you on this earth to keep this battle, fighting this battle and stopping this insanity that we're seeing on our family and, quite frankly, on our civilization. Robbie and Landon Starbuck, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for
so
shining a light
much.
on it.